Okay, so Joan of Arc, Jean, which is by Bruno Dumont, whose films we've reviewed here before on the show. I mean, a very changeable career, Life of Jesus, Humanity, had which I really, really liked, or Satan, which you and I had a long discussion about how it was that you pronounced that outside Satan, and then Slack Bay, which was this,
What was the
there
answer,
are.
by the way?
Well, the answer is that there are. He's a very, very divisive filmmaker. Okay, and
How do you pronounce the film? Is what I meant.
or Satan, like that. Well,
Okay,
that's how you
thank you.
said it. You told me because I said it differently, and you then corrected me. It means outside of Satan. It's this kind of avant-garde exploration of good and evil
Okay,
taking place in a very abstract setting.
okay.
But he's also done these weird comedies like Petit Quin and Slack Bay, which Slack Bay I didn't get at all. Here's this. This is one of the serious ones. But the interesting thing about it is this is one of the serious ones which, when it played, I think it was at Cannes, actually provoked more laughter than some of the comedies. It's a sequel to Jeanette, the childhood of Joan of Arc from 2017, which featured Lila Pla-Prudhomme in the title role. And that was about the childhood of Joan of Arc. So this is set in Joan of Arc's final years. So the actress is obviously younger than the character that she plays. Starts in 1429, Joan wanting to march on Paris, being fought in regal acquiescence. Then leaps forward to her in prison awaiting trial. Now, the life and trial of Joan of Arc have long fascinated filmmakers. You go back to Dreyer's Passion of Joan of Arc with René Jean Falconetti, which was actually based on record of the trial. You can think of Luc Besson's The Messenger with Mila Jovovich, which wasn't really based on fact. And the one thing you can say about this film is it is not like any of the films that have gone before it. Essentially, the second half of the trial stuff cuts between these glistening cathedral interiors meant to be wrong, and this World War II bunker where Joan is kept in prison. And I have to say, this is one of the rare cases when I read a review before I saw the film. There was a review in Sight and Sound when it played at Cannes, in which Sight and Sound magazine said, "This amdram retale of the Saints court case finds the director on his most testingly dismal form." And yeah, and I know exactly. So I thought, oh, for heaven's sake! And yet Simon Paul and the production team said, well, you should review it because it's an important film. I went in with very low expectations, and it is true that, as many critics have pointed out, there are moments in it that seem to be pure Monty Python. From the armor wearing to the guards who are guarding Joan when she's in the. There are moments in it of pure absurdist comedy. The question is, and there's a moment in the middle of the trial when suddenly it breaks into falsetto singing with synthesizer music. And I have a very high tolerance for movies that kind of discuss religion and theology at great length. And I also have a fairly high tolerance for a certain form of absurdist comedy. And the question in the case of this is, how much of the absurdity is deliberate? And I think the answer to that has to be all of it, because there is no way it can be accidental. So on the one hand, it is quite a testing film. I mean, Bruno Dumont works an awful lot with, with non-actors. Although actually, it's always true that non-actors speaking in a different language receive differently to, non-professional actors speaking the language, speaking your own language. So because it all seems it's a very theatrical performance anyway, the performances didn't bother me. And in fact, the young star of the film is very, very good. Um, but in that same review that was written in Sight and Sound, there was this phrase which stuck with me, which is that there is a vein of mildly lofty contempt running through Dumont's films. And it was funny because reading that kind of clarified for me what it was that I thought about the film. If I'm going to be charitable about it, I'd say this. I'd say, Joan of Arc has been done to death by cinema, and with good reason, because the trial of Joan of Arc is an extraordinary thing. If I was going to be uncharitable, I would say it's one of those films in which the director is almost laughing at you rather than laughing with you, and occasionally the sense of what he considers to be absurdist sort of role playing just becomes annoying. It just becomes arch. It's like there's a strange thing in which somebody's making a film about a serious subject matter, but simultaneously appearing to sneer at it in a way which prevents you from being able to question whether that is what they're actually doing. which is all a very long-winded way of saying I don't think I could recommend Joan of Arc to anybody, because honestly, you'd have to go into it wanting to see it and with the most positive attitude to it. But that said, I went into it having to see it and expecting it to be really, really hard work because it had fairly poor reviews, and actually being surprised by how much I got out of it. So it it bothered me, and at times it bored me, and occasionally it exasperated me. But I also found myself oddly gripped by it, and there is something about Bruno Dumont. It's it's the Lars von Trier thing. There is something there. I'm not entirely sure what it is, but it is something.